The $95 million wedding secret. Paraphrase version: when my son tied the knot, I held on to a $95 million secret just to discover who would show me genuine respect. I'm Samuel Washington, and I'm going to share a story that transformed everything I believed about family, dignity, and what truly lies in people's souls. At 63, I've experienced enough to understand that wealth transforms individuals, sometimes in positive ways, frequently in negative ones. However, nothing could have readied me for what I uncovered after my cherished wife Lorraine departed last spring. Before I proceed with this tale, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments which country you're watching from. I enjoy knowing my story reaches listeners worldwide. Thank you, Lorraine, and I shared 38 years of marriage. She served as my foundation, my guiding star, the woman who convinced me that love at first sight was real when I first saw her at that Howard University homecoming dance in 1986. We weren't wealthy. I served as a maintenance supervisor at City Hospital, while she taught third grade at our neighborhood elementary school. We lived contentedly in our humble 3-bedroom home in Southeast D.C., brought up our son Marcus right, and never lacked life's necessities. When physicians informed us about the aggressive cancer attacking her pancreas, we had roughly 3 months to absorb it all. 3 months to express everything we'd left unsaid, to embrace through our tears, to ready ourselves for an existence I couldn't fathom living alone. "Sam," she murmured during one of our final talks, her voice barely heard over the hospital equipment. "There's something in the safety deposit box at First National. Number 247. The keys hidden in my jewelry box beneath the velvet interior." I assumed she meant crucial documents, birth records, perhaps some bonds her grandmother had bequeathed her. Lorraine descended from a family that valued keeping items for safekeeping, and I anticipated discovering maybe several thousand in old savings bonds. 2 weeks following the funeral, when the house seemed too silent and I needed to occupy my hands, I finally visited the bank. The young clerk, a kind girl who recalled Lorraine from her regular visits, escorted me to the safety deposit box area with a compassionate smile. "Mrs. Washington was such a wonderful woman," she whispered gently. "I'm deeply sorry for your loss." I nodded, not trusting my words, and inserted the key. Within that small metal container lay a manila envelope thick enough to overwhelm anyone. My hands trembled as I opened it, anticipating insurance documents or vintage photographs. Instead, I discovered papers that made me collapse into that tiny provided chair. Trust paperwork, investment records, property deeds, all bearing Lorraine's maiden name, Lorraine Catherine Mitchell. Names and accounts she'd never mentioned. The bottom line, written in her precise teacher's handwriting on the summary page, read $94,847,293.17. $95 million, more or less. I reviewed that figure countless times until the security officer checked on me. It appeared my Lorraine, my sweet educator wife, had been a millionaire, a multimillionaire for nearly 3 decades, and I remained oblivious. She'd observed me worry over expenses, work extra hours to afford Marcus's textbooks, save every cent for his college costs, all while possessing enough wealth to purchase half our neighborhood. But I comprehended her reasoning. Lorraine understood me better than I understood myself. She recognized my pride, perhaps excessive pride. She knew I required the feeling of supporting my family through my own efforts. And she was correct. I chose not to inform Marcus immediately. Marcus had recently completed his residency at Johns Hopkins and was beginning his career as a pediatric surgeon. He'd finally achieved independence, created his own path, and I wanted to observe how this money might alter things, or whether it needed to change anything whatsoever. Marcus had always been a wonderful child, respectful and diligent. He phoned every Sunday, visited when possible, and never made me feel ashamed of my blue-collar occupation. But recently, something had shifted in his voice during our conversations. There was enthusiasm, nervous energy, that reminded me of how he sounded before major examinations. 3 months after discovering Lorraine's secret, Marcus drove down from Baltimore with news that clarified everything. "Dad, I want you to meet someone special," he announced, practically bouncing on my living room couch like a 12-year-old again. "Her name is Victoria Ashworth, and I plan to propose to her." The Ashworth name held no significance for me, but Marcus's delivery, like announcing a lottery victory, captured my attention. "Tell me about her, son." Marcus's expression illuminated in a way I hadn't witnessed since his medical school acceptance. "She's amazing, Dad. Intelligent, gorgeous, caring. She's completing her MBA at Georgetown, and her family, well, they're quite successful. Her father owns Ashworth Capital Management." I still didn't recognize the name, but I detected the admiration in my son's tone. "And you love her?" "I love her more than anything," he replied, and I could see his sincerity. "I'd like to bring her to meet you next weekend, if that's acceptable. Maybe we could have dinner here, like when I was growing up." I agreed. Naturally, I wanted to meet the woman who'd captured my son's heart, but something in Marcus's manner, a nervousness I'd never observed, made me wonder what truly concerned him. Victoria Ashworth embodied everything Marcus had described, and more. Beautiful in that polished magazine cover manner, with honey blonde hair and the assured presence of someone who'd never questioned their position in the world. She was gracious and courteous, praising my house and asking thoughtful questions about my hospital work. But something else existed there, something I couldn't identify. It appeared in how her eyes quickly surveyed my modest living room, noting the worn furniture and family photographs. It showed in her smile when I served dinner on Lorraine's good china, plates that seemed elegant to us, but probably appeared quaint to someone raised with genuine wealth. "Mr. Washington, Marcus has shared so much about you," she said over my attempt at Lorraine's famous pot roast. "It must be incredibly fulfilling working in healthcare maintenance. You truly keep everything operational." Her tone remained perfectly pleasant, but something about how she emphasized maintenance tightened my jaw. Marcus either missed it or chose to overlook it. "Dad's being modest," Marcus interjected. "He's not just maintenance. He's the head of facilities management for the entire hospital. They couldn't function without him." Victoria smiled sweetly. "Of course, essential workers are so valuable." The phrase, "essential workers," hung in the air like a challenge. It wasn't her words, but her delivery, like patting a child's head for trying hard. But Marcus was beaming, and Victoria was polite enough, so I kept my observations private. If my son was content, I could tolerate slight condescension from his future wife. It was during their departure that I overheard the conversation that truly opened my eyes. I was in the kitchen wrapping leftovers from Marcus to take to Baltimore when Victoria's voice drifted from the front porch. "Babe, are you certain about having the wedding here in D.C.? I mean, your father seems lovely, but—" "What?" Marcus's voice carried more sharpness than I'd heard in years. Nothing. It's just, my parents are accustomed to a certain standard of, maybe we could have a small ceremony here and then a larger reception at the country club. That way, everyone's comfortable. My father raised me," Marcus said. "This is my home. And I love that about you, Marcus. I love your authenticity, your background. It's refreshing. I just want everyone to feel welcome. Sometimes people from different backgrounds can feel uncomfortable." I heard Marcus sigh. "Maybe you're right. We could do something at your parents' club." My hand stopped on the aluminum foil. My son, the boy I'd raised to take pride in his origins, was already beginning to compromise his identity. I said nothing when Marcus returned for the leftovers. I embraced him goodbye and told Victoria it was pleasant meeting her. But that night, lying in the bed I'd shared with Lorraine for 38 years, I made a decision. I would keep that money secret a bit longer. I wanted to see how deep the situation went. Over the following months, as wedding preparations began seriously, I became better acquainted with the Ashworth family. And the more I learned, the less I appreciated what I observed. Charles Ashworth III was the type of man who ensured you knew his importance within 5 minutes of conversation. He managed investment portfolios for wealthy individuals, which he mentioned frequently. His wife, Patricia, was what my grandmother would have called society, the kind of woman who organized charity galas and discussed giving back to the community while looking through the people who served her drinks. They resided in a colonial mansion in Potomac, Maryland, complete with a circular driveway, manicured gardens, and a kind of old money elegance that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. When Marcus brought me to their house for dinner, I felt like I was touring a museum. "Samuel," Charles said, gripping my hand in what was probably intended as a firm handshake, but felt more like a strength test. "Marcus tells us you work at the hospital. Must be satisfying work, keeping the lights on." Again with the condescension wrapped in politeness. "It has its rewards," I replied evenly. Patricia was more subtle but equally clear in her opinions. "We're so excited about the wedding," she gushed over cocktails served by uniformed housekeeping staff. "Victoria has such diverse tastes in people. It's one of her most admirable qualities. Like Marcus with some exotic accessory she discovered at a boutique." Throughout the evening, I watched my son transform before my eyes. The Marcus I knew, confident, straightforward, proud of his accomplishments, became deferential, almost apologetic. When Charles inquired about his residency, Marcus minimized his achievements. When Patricia mentioned the wedding budget, Marcus quickly offered to contribute more than I knew he could afford. "Don't be silly, darling," Patricia laughed, touching Marcus's arm like he was a sweet but confused child. "Charles and I are happy to handle the wedding expenses. We understand the financial differences between our families." Her delivery of financial differences made it sound like we were refugees they graciously decided to sponsor. But the conversation about the wedding guest list truly bothered me. "Now, Samuel," Patricia said, consulting a leather-bound planner, "we'll need a list of your family and friends for the invitations. The venue can accommodate about 300 guests. 300 guests. Lorraine and I had married in our church basement with maybe 60 people and thought that was a crowd. I don't need many invitations. Most of my family is gone, and I have maybe 20 friends I'd want to invite." Patricia's smile became even more strained. "Of course, we understand. Sometimes smaller families are cozier." Charles cleared his throat. "We should probably discuss seating arrangements, too. We'll have some important business associates attending. Senators, judges, CEOs. We want to ensure everyone's comfortable." The unspoken message was clear. My 20 friends in the hospital and neighborhood wouldn't be seated with the senators and CEOs. Marcus said nothing. He simply nodded along like this was perfectly reasonable. That night, driving home to my empty house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Shame. Not shame about who I was or what I'd accomplished, but shame that my son was allowing these people to make him ashamed of where he came from. I thought about Lorraine, about how she would have handled the Ashworths. She would have smiled sweetly, complimented Patricia's dress, and somehow made it clear that she wasn't impressed by their money or attitude. She had a way of maintaining her dignity while making others examine theirs. I missed her so intensely in that moment that I had to pull over and compose myself. When I arrived home, I looked at the bank statements for the accounts Lorraine had left me. $95 million. More money than the Ashworths probably had, despite all their posturing. More money than Marcus could imagine. But I kept the secret. I wanted to see how far this would progress. As the wedding date approached, the subtle insults became less subtle. During a cake tasting at some high-end bakery in Georgetown, Patricia made sure to mention that they were keeping costs reasonable because not everyone can afford the luxury tier. When we toured the venue, some exclusive country club that probably cost more for one night than I earned in 6 months, Charles made a point of telling me that membership had a pretty selective process, but not to worry because I was their guest. The final straw came during the rehearsal dinner seating discussion. We were gathered in the Ashworths' dining room, reviewing final details when Patricia pulled out her seating chart. "Now, Samuel," she said, not looking up from her carefully organized papers, "we've placed you at table 12 near the back. You'll be with some of our, well, Let's call them our more casual guests. We thought you'd be more comfortable there. Table 12, near the back, with the casual guests. Marcus was studying his phone, pretending not to hear the conversation. Victoria was arranging flowers, also conveniently distracted. Table 12 sounds. Fine, I said quietly. Patricia beamed, like I'd just made her day easier. Wonderful. You're so understanding, Samuel. Not everyone would be so gracious about the logistics of a large wedding. But Charles wasn't finished. We really appreciate your flexibility, Sam. Can I call you Sam? This kind of event can be overwhelming for people who aren't used to it. We want everyone to feel welcome, but we also need to be mindful of our other guests' expectations. Other guests' expectations, like I was some embarrassment they needed to manage. I understand completely, I said, and I did. I understood that these people saw me as Marcus's burden, something to be tolerated and tucked away where I couldn't embarrass their important friends. What hurt most wasn't their attitude. I'd dealt with prejudice and condescension my whole life. What hurt was watching my son go along with it. Marcus, the boy I'd taught to stand up for himself and others. Marcus, who'd seen me work double shifts to pay for his education, and never once acted like I was ashamed of honest work. Marcus, who used to boast to his friends about how his dad fixed everything at the hospital. That Marcus was sitting right there, letting his future in-laws treat his father like a second-class citizen. The wedding was everything Patricia had promised it would be, elegant, expensive, and designed to impress. The country club was decorated with thousands of white roses and enough candles to illuminate half of Maryland. The guest list read like a who's who of Washington power players. I wore my best suit, the one I bought for Lorraine's funeral, and tried to blend into the background. At table 12, I was seated with two elderly relatives of Charles who seemed confused about why they were there, a college friend of Victoria's who spent the entire reception on her phone, and a few other people who were clearly being managed rather than celebrated. From my seat near the back, I watched Marcus and Victoria exchange vows in front of an altar that probably cost more than my annual salary. My son looked handsome in his expensive tuxedo, and Victoria was radiant in a dress that I later learned cost more than my car. I thought about Lorraine during the ceremony. She would have cried happy tears, I knew, but she also would have been hurt by how we'd been treated. The reception was a carefully orchestrated display of wealth and influence. Charles gave a speech about welcoming Marcus into our family that made it sound like they were doing him a tremendous favor. Victoria's maid of honor talked about how lucky Victoria was to find someone so genuine and down to earth. Everything was beautiful, everything was perfect, and I felt like a stranger at my own son's wedding. Marcus hadn't spoken to me since the ceremony beyond a quick handshake and, "Thanks for coming, Dad." He was too busy working the room, shaking hands with Charles's business associates, laughing at jokes from people who'd probably never heard of him 6 months ago. I watched my son, the boy who used to help me fix things around the house, who'd call me after every major exam to share his grades, who'd held my hand at his mother's funeral, transform into someone I barely recognized. That's when Patricia stood up for her mother of the bride toast. Patricia Ashworth rose from the head table with the kind of confidence that comes from never doubting your place in the world. The room quieted respectfully, crystal glasses raised in anticipation. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying easily across the elegant ballroom. "Charles and I are so thrilled to welcome all of you to celebrate this wonderful union between our daughter Victoria and her new husband Marcus." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I noticed she'd said Marcus, like she was still getting used to the name. When Victoria first told us about Marcus, we were impressed by his dedication to his medical career and his authentic approach to life. It's refreshing to meet someone so genuine, so unspoiled by the pressures of our modern world. There was that word again, authentic, like Marcus was some kind of folk art she discovered at a country fair. Patricia continued, her smile never wavering. "Of course, join our families means adjustments on both sides. We've learned so much about different perspectives, different backgrounds, different ways of approaching life." She paused, her eyes scanning the room and lingering for just a moment on table 12, where I sat with the other afterthoughts. We're confident that Marcus will adapt beautifully to our family's traditions and lifestyle, and we hope that a side of the family will adjust to the new lifestyle as well. Change can be challenging, but with patience and understanding, we can all learn to navigate these differences together. The words hit me like a physical blow. His side of the family needed to adjust to the new lifestyle, as if we were some charity case that needed to be brought up to their standards. I looked at Marcus, hoping to see some flash of anger, some sign that he recognized the insult his mother-in-law had just delivered to his father. Instead, I saw him nodding slightly, like he agreed with her assessment. The room erupted in polite applause. People smiled and raised their glasses, toasting the wisdom and generosity of Patricia Ashworth for so graciously accepting her daughter's choice in husband and his unfortunate family circumstances. That's when something inside me snapped. Not anger, exactly. Something colder and more determined than anger. Something that felt like justice finally arriving at the party. I stood up. The movement was slow enough that people near me noticed, but not dramatic enough to interrupt Patricia's ongoing speech about the importance of family unity and mutual respect. I straightened my tie, the same tie I'd worn to Lorraine's funeral, the same tie I'd worn to Marcus's medical school graduation. I cleared my throat. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying across the ballroom with the kind of authority that comes from 30 years of managing crises at a major hospital. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Patricia, but I think there's something I need to say." The room went quiet, not the respectful quiet of a planned toast, but the sharp, sudden quiet of 300 people realizing something unexpected was happening. Patricia's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Of course, Samuel. We'd love to hear from Marcus's father." She said it like she was indulging a child who'd asked to say grace at the grown-ups' table. I walked slowly toward the front of the room, my footsteps echoing on the polished marble floor. As I moved, I could feel the weight of all those eyes on me. Senators and CEOs and judges, all probably wondering what the maintenance worker was going to say. Marcus was staring at me with something that looked like panic. Victoria's face had gone pale. Charles was half rising from his chair like he was prepared to escort me out if necessary. I reached the front of the room and turned to face the crowd. 300 of Washington's finest, all dressed in their best clothes, all waiting to see what would happen next. "Thank you all for being here tonight." I began, my voice steady and clear. "It means the world to Marcus and Victoria to have so many people celebrate their love." I paused, looking out at the sea of faces, some curious, some concerned, some clearly annoyed at the interruption. Patricia just mentioned something about adjusting to new lifestyles, and I want to address that directly. I turned to look at her, maintaining my most polite smile. "You're absolutely right that this marriage brings together two different worlds, two different ways of living." Patricia nodded encouragingly, probably thinking I was about to thank her for her patience with my humble circumstances. "The thing is," I continued, "I've been thinking a lot about respect lately, about what it means and how we show it to each other. And I've been wondering whether respect should depend on how much money someone has, or whether it should be based on who they are as a person." The room was so quiet I could hear the ice settling in people's drinks. "See, I've been keeping a secret for the past few months. My late wife, God rest her soul, left me something when she passed away. Something she'd been hiding from me for nearly 30 years because she was afraid it might change who I was." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a bank statement I printed that morning, showing the current balance of just one of the accounts Lorraine had left me. "Patricia, you mentioned hoping that my side of the family would adjust to this new lifestyle." I unfolded the paper slowly, deliberately. "Don't worry about that. I've actually been adjusting to this lifestyle since I inherited $95 million from my wife 6 months ago." I held up the bank statement so the people in the front rows could see it. $95 million from my wife's inheritance, invested carefully over 30 years. I could have bought this country club. I could have paid for this wedding 100 times over. but I wanted to see who would treat me with respect without knowing I had more money than most of the people in this room. The silence that followed was the kind you hear right before thunder crashes. Complete, absolute, breathless silence. Patricia's face had gone from pale to gray. Charles was staring at the bank statement, like it might bite him. Victoria looked like she was going to be sick, but it was Marcus's expression that broke my heart. Shock, yes, but also something that looked like recognition, like he was seeing clearly for the first time in months. $95 million, I repeated, folding the paper and putting it back in my pocket. From my wife's inheritance, invested carefully over 30 years. I could have bought this country club. I could have paid for this wedding 100 times over. But I wanted to see who would treat me with respect without knowing I had more money than most of the people in this room. The answer, Patricia, is that most of you treat me exactly the way I expected you would. Like someone to be managed and hidden away, like an embarrassment that had to be tolerated for the sake of politeness. Charles, I said, turning to face him directly, you found your voice. Samuel, we had no idea. No, you didn't, and that's exactly the point. You didn't know, so you felt free to treat me like I was beneath you. You sat me at table 12 with the other people you wanted to forget about. You talked about me like I was a burden Marcus had to carry. You made it clear that my presence at my own son's wedding was something to be managed rather than celebrated. I turned to address the entire room. I've spent my entire life working with my hands, fixing things, keeping systems running. I've been proud of that work because it mattered. I helped keep a hospital functioning, so doctors could save lives. I raised a son who became a pediatric surgeon who saves children's lives every day. I was married to a woman who taught hundreds of kids to read and write and believe in themselves. My voice grew stronger as I continued. I never needed anyone's money to know my worth. I never needed anyone's approval to be proud of who I am. But tonight, I watched my son, the boy I raised to stand up for what's right, sit quietly while his new family treated his father like a second-class citizen. Marcus was crying now, tears streaming down his face as the full weight of what happened over the past few months finally hit him. Marcus, I said, looking directly at my son, I love you more than life itself. I always will, but I raised you better than this. I raised you to judge people by their character, not their bank accounts. I raised you to be proud of where you came from, not ashamed of it. Victoria was sobbing into her hands, her perfect wedding crumbling around her. Patricia and Charles looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. So here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice calm and controlled despite the chaos I'd unleashed. I'm going to leave now. I'm going to go home to the house where I raised my son, where I loved his mother, where I learned what really matters in life. And I'm going to hope that someday Marcus remembers the lessons we taught him about treating people with dignity and respect. I started walking toward the exit, then stopped and turned back one more time. Oh, and Patricia, you don't need to worry about my side of the family adjusting to your lifestyle. We've been living rich lives all along. We just measured wealth differently than you do. I was halfway to my car when I heard footsteps running behind me. I turned to see Marcus jogging across the parking lot, his expensive tuxedo jacket flapping in the evening breeze. Dad, wait. Please, just wait. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't look at him yet without feeling the disappointment all over again. Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know why I let them treat you like that. I do, I said, finally turning to face him. You got seduced by their world. You started believing that what they had was better than what we had. You forgot where you came from. Marcus was crying openly now, not caring who might see him from the country club windows. You're right. You're absolutely right. I let them make me ashamed of the best man I know. I let them make me ashamed of the man who taught me everything important I've ever learned. Why didn't you tell me about the money? All those years watching you work so hard, worry about bills. Because your mother was right. Money changes people. Look what happened to you just being around their money, Marcus. Imagine what would have happened if you'd grown up knowing we had more than we could ever spend. We stood there in the parking lot for a long moment, the sound of the reception continuing inside the country club behind us. What happens now? Marcus asked. Now you have to decide who you want to be. You have to decide whether you're going to be the man your mother and I raised, or whether you're going to be the man the Ashworths want you to be. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. I have to go back in there, he said. I have to face them. Yes, you do. And how you handle the next hour is going to determine what kind of man you become. But as Marcus turned to go back inside, I called out to him one more time. Marcus. He stopped and looked back. There's something else you need to know. Something I haven't told you yet. His eyes widened, probably wondering what other secrets his old man had been keeping. Your mother didn't just leave me money, son. She left detailed instructions about what to do with it. She wanted to make sure it was used for something meaningful, something that would honor the values we raised you with. I pulled another piece of paper from my jacket. Not a bank statement this time, but a letter in Lorraine's careful handwriting. She wanted to establish a foundation that provides full scholarships for kids from working-class families who want to become doctors, teachers, engineers. Kids who have the brains and the heart, but not the bank account. She wanted to make sure intelligence and character mattered more than family wealth. Marcus's eyes filled with fresh tears as the implications sank in. She already had it all planned out. I continued. The Samuel and Lorraine Washington Foundation. She wanted it to be our joint legacy, something that would help kids like you get the education they deserve. Dad, that's incredible. But here's the thing, Marcus. She also wrote that she wanted you to be involved in running it someday, when you were ready, when you had learned the difference between having money and being defined by money. I looked back toward the country club, where through the windows we could see the reception still in full swing, the guests probably gossiping about the drama that had just unfolded. Tonight, you showed me you're not ready yet, but I hope someday you will be. Marcus stood there in his expensive tuxedo, tears streaming down his face, finally understanding the full weight of what had happened. Not just tonight, but over the past few months, as he'd slowly lost himself in someone else's definition of success. How do I fix this, Dad? How do I make this right? You start by going back in there and standing up for what's right. You start by having an honest conversation with your wife about the kind of life you want to build together. You start by remembering that your mother and I raised you to treat people with dignity regardless of what they can do for you. And if Victoria can't accept that, then you'll have learned something important about the difference between love and convenience. I hugged my son, really hugged him, the way I used to when he was small and needed comfort after a bad dream. I love you, Marcus. Nothing will ever change that. But I won't sit quietly while people treat me like I'm less than human, even if those people are family now. I drove home to the quiet streets of Southeast D.C., past the neighborhoods where I grew up, past the hospital where I'd worked for 30 years, past the church where Lorraine and I were married in a ceremony that cost maybe $300 and was filled with more genuine love than anything I'd witnessed tonight. When I walked into my house, our house, the house where we had raised Marcus and built a life together, I felt the weight of the evening finally settling on my shoulders. But I didn't feel defeated. I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Clear about who I was. Clear about what mattered. Clear about the difference between having wealth and having worth. I sat down in my recliner. The same recliner where I'd helped Marcus with his homework, where Lorraine had graded papers, where we'd watch him graduate from medical school via live stream during the pandemic, and thought about what came next. The money was real. $95 million, carefully invested and grown over 30 years. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But Lorraine's plan for the foundation was real too. The Samuel and Lorraine Washington Foundation, designed to help kids who had talent and drive, but needed someone to believe in them enough to invest in their futures. Kids like Marcus had been. Kids like I had been before I dropped out of college to support my sick mother. Kids who deserved a chance to show what they could do if someone just opened the door. I thought about Patricia Ashworth's comment about adjusting to new lifestyles. She was right in a way. I was going to have to adjust to having this money, to the responsibility that came with it, to the opportunity to make a real difference in young people's lives. Now, tell me, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? I'd love to hear from you too. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and share this video with someone today.